200 people watched him do it. 200 witnesses to the moment everything shattered. The groom, seconds after saying, "I do," turned to his bride's best friend and slapped her so hard the sound echoed through the chapel. The bride dropped her bouquet. Guests gasped. Cameras flashed. And in that single moment, a secret 3 years in the making finally exploded into the open. By the time you hear what really happened that day, you'll question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the lies we tell to protect the people we care about most. This isn't a story about jealousy. It's not about a love triangle or wedding day drama. This is about a choice made on a dark road 3 years ago, a choice that cost a young man his life, and a friendship that was built on a foundation of guilt, grief, and a promise to never speak the truth. What you're about to hear will make you uncomfortable. It will make you question what you would do if you were faced with the same impossible decision. And it will leave you wondering whether justice was ever really served or whether everyone involved simply lost everything they ever cared about. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let's start at the beginning, 3 years before that slap heard around the internet. Ethan Cole was 31 years old, working as an architect for a mid-sized firm in Portland, Oregon. He wasn't wealthy, but he was comfortable. He had a small apartment downtown, a reliable car, and a life that was steady if not particularly exciting. He'd been through a couple of relationships that didn't work out, nothing dramatic, just the usual slow fade that happens when two people realize they're not quite right for each other. He'd mostly given up on the idea of finding someone special when he met Lydia Brooks at a mutual friend's barbecue in the summer of 2021. She was 26 then, working as a nurse at the Children's Hospital, and Ethan said later that the first thing he noticed about her was her laugh. It was genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that made everyone around her smile too. They talked for hours that night, long after most of the guests had left, sitting on the back porch while moths circled the overhead light. She told him about her work, about the kids she cared for, about how hard it was sometimes to see them suffer, but how rewarding it felt when they got better. He told her about the buildings he designed, how he loved the idea of creating spaces where people would live their lives, fall in love, raise families. It sounds almost too perfect, doesn't it? But people who knew them said it really was like that at first. Easy, natural, like they'd been waiting for each other without knowing it. Lydia had one constant in her life besides her work, and that was Maya Daniels. They'd been best friends since they were 10 years old, growing up 3 houses apart in a quiet suburb outside Portland. Maya was the bold one, the one who always spoke her mind, who stood up for Lydia when boys teased her in middle school, who drove her to the hospital when her father had a heart attack their senior year. They were sisters in every way that mattered, and when Lydia introduced Maya to Ethan 2 months into their relationship, it should have been a moment of joy. Maya was happy for her friend, or at least she seemed to be. She hugged Ethan, welcomed him into their circle, told Lydia later that night that she thought he was good for her. But there was something, a hesitation maybe, a flicker of something in Maya's eyes that Lydia couldn't quite read. She brushed it off. Maya had always been protective. It made sense that she'd be cautious about any man who entered Lydia's life. What Lydia didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Maya had already met Ethan before, not personally, but she'd seen his face, and she'd spent 2 years trying to find him. 3 years earlier, in the fall of 2020, Maya's younger brother Jake was 22 years old. He just graduated from community college and was working part-time at a bookstore while he figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He was a quiet kid, thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. On the night of October 15th, Jake was walking home from his shift around 11 p.m. The bookstore was only a mile from the apartment he shared with 2 roommates, and he liked the walk, liked the quiet streets and the cool autumn air. He was crossing an intersection, had the walk signal, earbuds in listening to a podcast, when a car ran the red light and hit him at 40 miles per hour. The impact threw him 30 feet. The car didn't stop. Witnesses said it was a dark sedan, maybe blue or black, and it sped away before anyone could get a plate number. Jake died on the pavement before the ambulance arrived. He was Maya's only sibling. Their parents were already gone, lost to cancer and a heart attack within a year of each other when Maya and Jake were in their early 20s. Maya had raised him in a way, worked 2 jobs to help pay his tuition, drove him to campus every morning before her own shift started. He was her whole world, and in one moment, because some coward couldn't face what they'd done, he was gone. The police investigated. They pulled traffic camera footage, interviewed witnesses, checked body shops for vehicles with front-end damage, but they never found the driver. The case went cold after 6 months. Maya never stopped looking. She kept a folder on her laptop with every piece of information she could find. Grainy screenshots from security cameras, witness descriptions. She drove through neighborhoods at night looking for cars that matched the description. She knew it was obsessive. She knew it was probably hopeless. But it was the only way she could cope with the grief, the rage, the unbearable injustice of knowing that someone out there was living their life while Jake was in the ground. And then, 2 years later, she met Ethan Cole. It happened at that same barbecue where Ethan met Lydia. Maya arrived late, stuck in traffic after a long shift managing a retail store downtown. She walked into the backyard just as Ethan was telling a story, something funny about a client who wanted him to design a house shaped like a spaceship. Everyone was laughing. Maya barely glanced at him as she grabbed a drink and found Lydia. But later, when Ethan was leaving and walked past her to get to his car, she saw it. The car parked at the curb. A dark blue sedan, older model with a small dent in the front bumper that had been badly repaired. Her heart stopped. She memorized the license plate, ran it through a contact she had at the DMV, someone who owed her a favor. The car was registered to Ethan Cole. She pulled up his driver's license photo. Same face, same man who was now dating her best friend. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She sat in her apartment that night staring at the photo, trying to decide what to do. Should she go to the police? Should she tell Lydia? But she had no proof. Just a car that matched the description and a dent that could have come from anywhere. If she accused him and was wrong, she'd destroy Lydia's happiness for nothing. If she was right and she confronted him too soon, he might disappear before justice could be served. So Maya did something she would regret for the rest of her life. She stayed quiet. She watched. She got close to Ethan, played the role of the supportive best friend, all while gathering evidence. She took photos of his car from every angle. She checked his work schedule against the night Jake died and found that he had no alibi, had told Lydia he was home alone that night. She hired a private investigator who confirmed that Ethan had taken his car to an auto body shop in Vancouver, Washington, just across the state line, 3 days after Jake was killed. The shop had no record of the repair. It was paid in cash, but the investigator found a mechanic who remembered the job. Front bumper damage, headlight replaced. The customer was in a hurry, paid double to get it done in 1 day. Maya had everything she needed. But she still didn't go to the police, because by then Ethan had proposed to Lydia, and Lydia was happier than Maya had ever seen her. How do you tell your best friend that the man she's planning to marry is the person who killed your brother? How do you destroy her entire world? Maya told herself she'd find the right moment. She'd wait until after the engagement excitement died down. But then Lydia asked her to be the maid of honor, and Maya said yes, because she had a plan. The wedding was planned for 18 months after the engagement. Lydia wanted a fall ceremony, something small and intimate with close family and friends. They booked a historic chapel on the outskirts of Portland, a beautiful old building with stained glass windows and wooden pews that smelled like candle wax and old hymn books. Maya threw herself into the planning. She helped Lydia pick out her dress, a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves. She organized the bridal shower, the bachelorette party. She smiled through all of it, even though every moment felt like glass in her throat. Ethan was polite to her, friendly even, but there was always a tension between them that neither of them acknowledged. Lydia noticed it sometimes, asked Maya if everything was okay, if she and Ethan had gotten into some kind of disagreement. Maya always said no, everything was fine, she was just stressed with work. Ethan never said anything at all. But if you'd watched them closely, you would have seen the way his jaw tightened whenever Maya entered a room, the way his hands clenched when she spoke to Lydia. He knew. Maybe not consciously, but on some level, he knew she was a threat. The morning of the wedding, Maya woke up in the bridal suite with Lydia and 2 other bridesmaids. They drank champagne and did each other's makeup, and Lydia kept saying how perfect everything was, how she couldn't believe this day was finally here. Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her mascara wand. One of the bridesmaids asked if she was okay, and she said she was just emotional, just so happy for Lydia. But the truth was she was terrified, because she'd made a decision. She was going to tell the truth. Not to Lydia, not privately, but in front of everyone. During her maid of honor speech at the reception, she'd written it all out, every detail, every piece of evidence. She was going to stand up in front of 200 people and expose Ethan Cole for what he was. She told herself it was the only way. If she told Lydia privately, Ethan might convince her it was a mistake, might manipulate her into staying quiet. But if she said it publicly, with witnesses, with Lydia's family and friends all watching, there would be no escaping it. Justice would finally be served. Jake would finally have justice. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Lydia cried during her vows. Ethan's voice cracked when he said, "I do." If you'd been there, if you'd seen them standing at that altar holding hands, you would have believed they were meant to be together. The guests were moved. Some were crying. Maya stood next to Lydia holding her bouquet and felt like she was going to be sick. She kept thinking about Jake. About the last time she saw him, the morning of the day he died, when he'd grabbed a coffee and kissed her cheek and said he'd see her later. She never saw him again. And the man responsible was standing 10 feet away, slipping a ring onto her best friend's finger. The ceremony ended. Everyone applauded. Ethan and Lydia walked back down the aisle together, beaming, and the guests filed out to the reception hall. Maya followed, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The reception started at 6 p.m. Dinner was served, a choice of salmon or chicken, and the guests ate and laughed and toasted the happy couple. Lydia's uncle gave a speech about how he'd known her since she was a baby, and how proud he was of the woman she'd become. Ethan's best man told an embarrassing story about a fishing trip where Ethan fell out of the boat. Everyone laughed, the DJ played music, couples danced, and then it was time for the maid of honor speech. Maya stood up. The room quieted. Lydia was smiling at her, eyes shining with champagne and happiness. Ethan was sitting next to her, his arm around her shoulders, and when his eyes met Maya's, there was something there, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. He knew what was coming. Maya pulled the folded paper from her clutch. Her hands were shaking. She started to speak. "Lydia, you've been my sister for 20 years. We've been through everything together, losing our parents, bad breakups, late nights in hospital waiting rooms. You've been there for every moment of my life that mattered, and I've tried to be there for yours." She paused, looked down at the paper, looked back up at Lydia. "Which is why this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Because I need to tell you something about the man you just married. Something I should have told you 2 years ago. On October 15th, 2020, my brother Jake was killed by a hit-and-run driver. The police never found who did it, but I did. 3 weeks ago, I confirmed that the car that killed Jake belonged to Ethan. I have the repair records, I have witness statements, and I have proof that Ethan was driving that night." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Lydia's face went white. Ethan stood up slowly. Maya kept talking. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't let you spend your life with someone who took my brother's life and never even—" That's when Ethan moved. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and slapped her across the face. The sound was like a gunshot. Maya stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. Guests screamed. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the floor. Lydia was on her feet, shouting Ethan's name. Ethan was standing there, breathing hard, his hand still raised, and he was staring at Maya with an expression that wasn't anger. It was desperation. It was fear. And he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should have told her the truth, Maya. The whole truth. Not just the parts that make you look innocent." What happened next was chaos. Several guests rushed to Maya, helped her into a chair. Someone brought ice for her face. Others surrounded Ethan, demanding to know what he meant, what truth he was talking about. Lydia was standing frozen in the middle of it all, still holding her champagne glass, staring at Ethan like she'd never seen him before. The wedding coordinator called the police. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived. They separated Ethan and Maya, took statements from witnesses. Maya refused to press charges for the assault. She said she just wanted to go home. The police took down her information about the hit-and-run allegation, said they'd follow up with the original investigating officers. The wedding was over. Guests filed out in shocked silence. Lydia's mother was crying. Ethan's father was on the phone with a lawyer, and Lydia disappeared. She didn't go to the hotel room she and Ethan had booked for their wedding night. She didn't answer her phone. Her bridesmaids found her 3 hours later sitting in her car in the chapel parking lot, still in her wedding dress, staring at nothing. The story exploded online within hours. Someone had filmed the slap on their phone and posted it to social media. It went viral immediately. Millions of views. News outlets picked it up. Headlines screamed, "Groom attacks best friend at wedding after shocking accusation." "Hit-and-run cover-up exposed at Portland wedding." The comments were vicious, divided. Some people called Ethan a monster. Others said Maya had ruined an innocent man's life with false accusations. Nobody knew what to believe. The police reopened Jake's case. They brought Ethan in for questioning. He came with his lawyer and refused to answer any questions, but his car was impounded and forensic teams went over every inch of it. The repair records Maya had were subpoenaed. The mechanic who'd done the work was interviewed, and slowly, piece by piece, the evidence came together. The car had been in an accident consistent with hitting a pedestrian. The timing matched. Ethan had no alibi, but there was still no direct evidence that he'd been driving, no witnesses who'd seen his face, no DNA, nothing that would hold up in court. Lydia spent the next week at her mother's house. She wouldn't see Ethan, wouldn't take his calls. Maya tried to reach out to her, but Lydia wouldn't respond to her either. She felt betrayed by both of them. Betrayed by Maya for keeping this secret for 2 years, betrayed by Ethan for possibly being a killer. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Lydia barely spoke. She sat in her childhood bedroom surrounded by boxes of wedding gifts that had been delivered and stared at her hands. She kept thinking about the moment Ethan slapped Maya, the look on his face. She'd never seen him violent before, never even seen him raise his voice. But in that moment, he'd been someone else entirely, someone capable of anything. The thought made her physically ill. Meanwhile, the media circus continued. Reporters camped outside Ethan's apartment building. His firm put him on administrative leave. Maya was getting death threats online from people who thought she'd made the whole thing up out of jealousy. Her social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages. She stopped leaving her apartment, stopped answering her phone. She'd thought exposing Ethan would bring her peace, would give Jake the justice he deserved. Instead, it had unleashed something she couldn't control. She started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, kept seeing Jake's face, kept hearing the thud of his body hitting the pavement even though she hadn't been there, had only imagined it 1,000 times. She wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, if maybe she'd been wrong, if maybe her grief had made her see things that weren't there. And then, 2 weeks after the wedding, a detective knocked on Lydia's mother's door. His name was Detective Martinez, and he'd been assigned to Jake's case. He asked if he could speak to Lydia privately. They sat in the living room, and he said he had some questions about the night Jake died. Lydia was confused. She hadn't even known Ethan back then. What could she possibly know? Martinez pulled out a notebook. He said that during their investigation they'd pulled phone records, credit card statements, security footage from the area around the accident, and they'd found something interesting: a gas station 2 blocks from the intersection where Jake was hit. The security camera had captured a car matching Ethan's at the pump at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the accident. The driver had gone inside to pay. The footage was grainy, but they'd enhanced it, and the person driving Ethan's car that night wasn't Ethan. It was Lydia. The room tilted. Lydia couldn't breathe. Martinez was still talking, but his voice sounded far away. He was saying something about how they'd checked her credit card records and she'd paid for gas at that station at exactly 10:43 p.m. How they'd pulled her cell phone records and she'd been in that area all evening. How witnesses had described the driver as having long hair, a detail they'd overlooked at the time because they'd been looking for a male suspect. But now, with the enhanced footage, they could see clearly. It was her. Lydia started crying. She couldn't stop. Martinez asked her if she needed a lawyer, and she shook her head. She said she wanted to tell him everything, because she'd been carrying this for 3 years, and it was crushing her. She hadn't meant to. It was an accident. She'd been driving home from a friend's house. She'd just started dating Ethan a few weeks earlier, and was using his car because hers was in the shop. She'd been tired, distracted, looking at her phone for just a second to check a message. She didn't see Jake step into the crosswalk. Didn't see him until it was too late. The impact was so sudden, so horrible. She slammed on the brakes, but it was already done. She saw him lying in the street, and she panicked. She didn't know what to do. She was terrified, so she drove away. She went straight to Ethan's apartment, sobbing, hysterical, and told him what happened. And Ethan made a decision that would destroy both their lives. He told her to go inside, to wash her face, to calm down. He said he would take care of it. He drove the car to his friend's garage that night and cleaned it, scrubbed every surface. The next morning he drove it to the body shop in Vancouver and paid cash for the repairs. He never told anyone, never went to the police. He did it because he loved her, because she was a nurse, because her whole career would be over if anyone found out, because he thought he could protect her. And for 3 years, it worked. Until Maya figured it out. Except Maya had figured out the wrong thing. She'd seen Ethan's car, found the repair records, and assumed he'd been driving. She never considered that it might have been someone else. And Ethan couldn't tell her the truth without destroying Lydia. So when Maya stood up at the wedding and tried to expose him, he snapped. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting Lydia. And in that moment, when he slapped Maya and shouted that she didn't know the whole truth, he was trying to tell her without saying the words, trying to make her stop before she ruined an innocent woman's life. The aftermath of Lydia's confession was devastating. She was arrested and charged with vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident. The maximum sentence was 10 years. Ethan was charged as an accessory after the fact. His lawyer argued that he'd been trying to protect someone he loved, that he'd made a terrible mistake but hadn't committed the original crime. The prosecutor argued that he'd obstructed justice and helped a killer evade responsibility. The case went to trial 8 months later. The courtroom was packed every day. Maya sat in the gallery, her face blank, watching the woman who'd been her best friend testify about the night she killed Jake. Lydia cried on the stand, said she thought about it every single day, said she'd wanted to confess so many times but was too afraid, said she knew it was unforgivable. The defense presented character witnesses, people who talked about what a good person Lydia was, how she dedicated her life to helping sick children. The prosecution showed photos of Jake, showed the trajectory of his life cut short, asked the jury to imagine what he might have become if he'd lived. Maya was called to testify. She walked to the stand slowly, her hands shaking. The prosecutor asked her how Jake's death had affected her. She said it destroyed her, said she'd lost the only family she had left, said she'd spent 3 years searching for answers, and when she finally found them, she discovered she'd been wrong about who was responsible, but she'd been right that someone needed to pay. She looked directly at Lydia when she said it. Lydia couldn't meet her eyes. The prosecutor asked Maya if she forgave Lydia. Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she said no. She said she didn't think she ever could. The courtroom was silent. You could feel the weight of it, the grief, the rage, the absolute impossibility of making any of this right. Jake was still dead. Lydia's life was ruined. Ethan's life was ruined. And Maya was left with nothing but the knowledge that justice, even when it finally comes, doesn't heal anything. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found Lydia guilty on both counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison. Ethan was sentenced to 2 years for his role in the cover-up. When the sentences were read, Lydia collapsed. Her mother screamed. Ethan sat with his head in his hands. Maya walked out of the courtroom and sat on a bench outside and felt nothing. She'd wanted this. She'd fought for this. But now that it was over, she just felt empty. A reporter approached her, asked how she felt about the verdict. She said she didn't know, said she thought she'd feel some kind of relief, but all she felt was tired. The reporter asked if she had any message for Lydia. Maya thought about it. Then she said, "I hope she thinks about Jake every single day for the rest of her life, because I do." Ethan and Lydia were both released on bail pending their appeals. They had 3 weeks before they had to report to prison. They spent it together in Ethan's apartment, the same place where Lydia had shown up 3 years earlier covered in Jake's blood. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? Everything they'd tried to build together was gone. The wedding that never was, the future they'd planned, all of it crushed under the weight of a secret they'd tried to bury. On their last night before prison, Lydia asked Ethan if he regretted it, regretted helping her, covering for her, throwing away his own life to protect hers. He said no, said he'd do it again, said loving her was the only thing he'd ever done that felt right, even if it destroyed him. She started crying, said she was so sorry for everything, for dragging him into this, for being too weak to face what she'd done. He held her and said it wasn't her fault, but they both knew that wasn't true. It was her fault, and it was his fault, and it was the fault of that one split second when she'd looked at her phone instead of the road, that one choice that rippled out and destroyed everything it touched. The day they reported to prison, there were cameras everywhere, protesters on both sides, some holding signs that said, "Justice for Jake," others that said, "Free Lydia." Ethan and Lydia arrived separately, walked in through different entrances. They didn't say goodbye. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe there was nothing left to say. Maya wasn't there. She'd left Portland 2 weeks earlier, packed everything she owned into her car and drove to Seattle. Started over in a city where nobody knew her story. Got a job managing a small bookstore, the kind of place Jake would have loved. She thought about him every day, just like she'd said she would. Thought about the what-ifs. What if Lydia had been paying attention? What if she'd stopped and called an ambulance instead of running? What if Ethan had told the truth from the beginning? Would it have changed anything? Would Jake still be dead? Yes. But maybe the rest of them wouldn't have destroyed themselves trying to hide from it. 2 years passed. Ethan was released after serving his full sentence with no early parole. He'd kept his head down in prison, stayed out of trouble. When he walked out, there was nobody waiting for him. His family had mostly cut him off, unable to reconcile what he'd done. His career was over. No firm would hire him with a criminal record. He moved to a small town in eastern Oregon, got a job doing construction, lived in a trailer and tried to disappear. Lydia was still in prison. She had 4 years left on her sentence. She'd become a model prisoner, working in the medical unit, helping other inmates with basic health care. It was the only thing that made her feel human anymore, the only way she could try to atone for what she'd taken from the world. She wrote letters to Ethan sometimes. He never wrote back. She understood why. Their love, if you could even call it that anymore, had been built on a foundation of death and lies. There was no coming back from that. Maya stayed in Seattle. She'd started seeing a therapist, trying to work through the grief and anger that still consumed her. She'd thought the trial would give her closure, but it hadn't. She still had nightmares about Jake. still saw his face in crowds sometimes and had to remind herself he was gone. Her therapist asked her once if she'd ever considered that maybe she'd been angry at the wrong person. Not just Lydia and Ethan, but herself, for not being there that night, for not protecting Jake the way she'd always protected him, for failing him in the one moment that mattered most. Maya broke down when she heard it, because it was true. She'd been carrying guilt that wasn't even hers to carry, and it had poisoned everything. Then, 3 years after the trial, something happened that changed everything again. A journalist doing a retrospective piece on the case started digging deeper into the evidence. She interviewed the witnesses again, went back through the police reports, and she found something that had been overlooked. A second security camera at a convenience store across from the intersection. The footage had been collected during the original investigation, but never thoroughly reviewed because the angle seemed wrong, seemed like it wouldn't show anything useful. But the journalist had it enhanced by a video forensics expert, and when they cleaned up the footage, they could see something. The car that hit Jake had 2 people inside. The driver had long hair, matching Lydia's description, but there was someone in the passenger seat, and when the car hit Jake, both people got out. Only for a few seconds, long enough to look at what they'd done, and then the passenger ran around to the driver's side, pushed Lydia out of the way, and got behind the wheel. Then they drove off, leaving Jake dying in the street. The journalist froze the frame and enhanced it further. The person in the passenger seat, the person who'd taken over driving, was clearly visible now. It was Ethan. He hadn't just helped cover up the crime afterward. He'd been there. He'd made the decision to leave, and he'd driven away while Lydia sat in the passenger seat, frozen in shock. The entire story they'd told, the story Lydia had confessed to, was a lie. Or at least, not the whole truth. Lydia had been driving when the car hit Jake. That part was real. But Ethan had been the one who made the choice to run. Lydia had wanted to stop, had started to get out of the car to help, and Ethan had physically stopped her, had taken control, had decided that protecting their future was more important than saving a stranger's life. And then, when Maya started investigating, when the truth was about to come out, Ethan had let Lydia take all the blame, had convinced her it was her fault, had made her believe that confessing was the right thing to do, all while hiding his own role in the decision that sealed Jake's fate. When the footage went public, everything exploded again. Lydia's lawyer immediately filed for a new trial. The prosecution had to reconsider Ethan's charges. But here's the thing. Here's the part that makes this story so much darker. Ethan was already out of prison. He'd served his time, and because of double jeopardy laws, he couldn't be charged again for the same crime. Even with this new evidence, even knowing that he'd been the one to drive away, that he'd been the one who made the fatal choice, there was nothing anyone could do. He was legally free. Lydia, on the other hand, had confessed based on incomplete information. Her lawyer argued she'd been coerced, manipulated, that she'd taken responsibility for actions that were primarily Ethan's. The judge agreed to reduce her sentence. She was released after serving just 4 years total. But the damage was done. Her nursing license was gone. Her reputation was destroyed, and she was left with the knowledge that the man she'd loved, the man she'd protected, had been lying to her the entire time. Today, Lydia lives in a small apartment in Sacramento. She works at a veterinary clinic, one of the few places that would hire her with her record. She's not allowed to work with human patients anymore. She goes to therapy twice a week. She doesn't date, doesn't have many friends. She sent Maya a letter last year, just said she was sorry, said she knew it would never be enough, but she needed to say it anyway. Maya never responded. Ethan is still in that small town in eastern Oregon. He lives alone, doesn't talk to anyone if he can help it. People in town know who he is, know what he did. They leave him alone. There were rumors last year that he tried to take his own life. Nobody knows if they're true. He's never given an interview, never explained himself. Maybe he doesn't think he can. Maybe he knows that no explanation would ever be enough. And Maya is still in Seattle. She got married last year to a teacher she met at a grief support group. They're trying to have a baby. She visits Jake's grave every year on the anniversary of his death, brings flowers, tells him about her life. She still thinks about that wedding, about the moment Ethan's hand connected with her face, about the look in his eyes. She wonders sometimes if he slapped her because he was trying to stop the truth from coming out, or because some part of him wanted it to, wanted someone to finally know what he'd done, wanted to be caught. She'll never know. None of them will ever really know what was going through Ethan's mind that night, either the night Jake died or the night of the wedding. All they know is that one choice, one moment of cowardice, destroyed 5 lives completely. Jake's, Maya's, Lydia's, Ethan's, and even Jake's family, his friends, everyone who loved him. So, here's the question I want to leave you with, and I really want you to think about this. To comment below and tell me what you honestly believe. Was justice served? Ethan walked free after 2 years, even though he was the one who made the decision to leave Jake dying. Lydia lost 6 years of her life for a crime where she was as much a victim of Ethan's manipulation as Jake was a victim of the accident. Maya got her answers but lost her best friend and spent years consumed by a hatred that nearly destroyed her too. Nobody won. Everybody lost. And Jake is still dead. Nothing changed that. So was it worth it? Was the truth worth the cost? If you were in Maya's position, would you have done what she did, or would you have let it go? If you were Lydia, would you have confessed, or would you have kept running? And if you were Ethan, could you live with yourself knowing you'd let someone else pay for your choices? These aren't easy questions. There are no right answers, but I think they're worth asking, because every single one of us makes choices every day that affect other people's lives. Most of them are small, some of them are enormous, and we never really know which ones will come back to haunt us. If this story affected you, if it made you think about your own life, your own choices, the secrets you might be carrying, or the people you're protecting, I want you to do something for me. Don't just scroll past. Take a moment. Comment below and tell me honestly what you would have done. Would you have been Maya, searching for justice no matter the cost? Would you have been Lydia, so paralyzed by fear that you let someone else control your entire life? Or would you have been Ethan, so convinced that love justified anything that you'd destroy everyone around you to protect it? And here's the harder question. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting someone you loved? How did you choose? What happened after? Because I think that's what this story is really about. Not just about a hit and run or a wedding or a slap that went viral. It's about the impossible choices we face when the truth and love are at war with each other, and how there's no version of that war where everyone survives intact. There's a part of Maya's story I didn't mention earlier, something she told her therapist about a year after Lydia was released. She said that the worst part wasn't the anger or the grief or even the betrayal. The worst part was that some small part of her understood why Lydia ran, why Ethan helped her. Because if you'd asked Maya before any of this happened if she would die for Jake, she would have said yes without hesitation. She would have taken a bullet for him, would have given up anything. And in a twisted way, that's exactly what Lydia was trying to do when she got behind the wheel that night and panicked. She was trying to save herself, yes, but she was also trying to save her future, the life she was building, the person she was becoming. It was selfish, it was unforgivable, but it was also profoundly human. We all want to believe we'd be heroes in moments of crisis, that we'd stop the car, call the ambulance, face the consequences no matter how severe. But the truth is, most of us don't know what we'd do until we're in that moment. And by then, it's too late to choose differently. The journalist who uncovered the footage, her name was Rebecca Chen. She published a long-form article about the case last year. In it, she interviewed dozens of people connected to the story. Wedding guests who were there that night, police officers who investigated, legal experts who analyzed the case. And at the end of the article, she included a quote that stayed with me. She wrote, "In the end, everyone involved in this tragedy lost something they could never get back. Jake lost his life. Maya lost her brother and her best friend. Lydia lost her freedom, her career, and her sense of self. Ethan lost his humanity. And all of us, everyone who watched this story unfold, lost a little bit of our faith in the idea that love conquers all. Because sometimes love doesn't conquer anything. Sometimes it just makes the destruction more painful, because you have to watch someone you care about get buried under the weight of choices they can't take back. I read that quote probably 50 times when I was researching this story, and every time it hits me differently. Because I think we all want to believe that love is enough, that if you care about someone deeply enough, you can protect them from anything, even from themselves. But Ethan's story proves that's not true. His love for Lydia didn't save her. It damned her. It made her weak when she needed to be strong. It gave her an excuse to run when she should have stayed. And in the end, his love destroyed both of them just as surely as that car destroyed Jake. That's the real tragedy here. Not just that a young man died senselessly, though that's tragedy enough, but that the people who caused it spent years compounding that tragedy, making it worse with every lie, every cover-up, every choice to prioritize their own comfort over justice for the person they killed. And Maya had to live with the knowledge that she'd been friends with Lydia for 2 years while Lydia was hiding this secret, had celebrated her engagement, planned her wedding, stood next to her at the altar, all while Lydia knew she'd killed Maya's brother and said nothing. How do you process that level of betrayal? How do you reconcile the person you thought you knew with the person who could look you in the eye every day and lie? Maya told her therapist she sometimes dreams that she's back at that wedding, standing at the microphone about to give her speech. But in the dream, she doesn't say anything about Ethan or the hit and run. She just looks at Lydia and says, "I forgive you." And then she wakes up, and she feels guilty for even dreaming it, because she doesn't forgive Lydia. She doesn't know if she ever will, and she hates herself for wanting to. That's the thing about grief and betrayal. They don't have clean endings. They don't resolve neatly. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel better. You just learn to carry it. You learn to get up in the morning even though the weight is still there. You learn to smile again, to laugh again, even though part of you feels guilty for experiencing joy when someone you loved never will. Maya is learning that now, slowly, painfully, but she's learning. And maybe that's the only real resolution any of them will ever get. Not justice, not forgiveness, just the slow, grinding work of learning to live with what happened and who they've become because of it. So I'll ask you one more time, and I really want you to answer this in the comments because I read every single one. If you were at that wedding, if you'd witnessed that slap, if you'd heard Maya's accusation and Ethan's response, whose side would you have been on? Would you have believed Maya immediately? Or would you have given Ethan the benefit of the doubt? Would you have thought Maya was jealous, bitter, trying to destroy her friend's happiness? Or would you have known, somehow, that she was telling the truth? Because that's what makes this story so devastating to me. The people in that room, those 200 witnesses, they had to make a choice in that moment about who to believe, and most of them got it wrong. Most of them defended Ethan, told Maya she was cruel for saying those things, comforted Lydia, and told her it would all be okay. They chose wrong because they didn't have all the information, because the truth was so much more complicated than it seemed, and by the time they realized their mistake, the damage was already done.